when my daughter, Alexis, shoved me against the kitchen wall and yelled, "Oh, you're going to the nursing home. Oh, or you can sleep with the horses in the paddock. Pick now." I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces, not because of the threat itself, but because I only saw coldness in her eyes, as if I were an old piece of furniture taking up too much space. What she didn't know was that I had been keeping a secret for 30 years, a secret that would change everything between us. And in that moment, I decided it was time to use the only weapon I had left, the truth. But before I continue, check if you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. My name is Sophia. I am 62 years old, and my whole life I believed that a mother's love was capable of overcoming anything, that it was enough to give everything, to sacrifice down to the last hair, for children to recognize that love. But life taught me in a brutal way that it's not always like that. I raised Alexis alone since she was 5 years old. My husband, Jim, abandoned us without looking back, leaving only debts and a small house on the outskirts of a quiet town in Vermont. The house had a large piece of land with some horses that Jim raised as a hobby. When he left, I thought about selling everything, but Alexis loved those animals. I saw her little eyes light up every time she stroked the horses' manes, and I didn't have the heart to take that away from her. So I kept going. I worked as a seamstress during the day and as a cleaner at night. My hands became rough, my back hurt constantly, but every time I saw Alexis smile, I thought it was all worth it. I paid for her education, her clothes, her dreams. When she wanted to go to college to study business administration in the capital, I sold the jewelry my mother left me to pay for the first semester in New York City, New York. It was at college where she met George, a boy from a wealthy family who was studying the same major. From the start, I noticed he looked at our simple life with contempt. When he came to visit us for the first time, he wrinkled his nose at the sight of the modest house, the horses in the paddock, the peeling paint on the walls. But Alexis was in love. And who was I to interfere with my daughter's happiness? They got married 3 years later, in a ceremony for which I used up my last savings to help pay. George didn't even say thank you. He just smiled that fake smile and went back to talking with his fancy friends. That day, for the first time, I felt like I was losing my daughter. Not because of the marriage, but because of a world I didn't belong to. The first few years were calm. Alexis visited me occasionally, always in a rush, always checking her watch. I pretended not to notice the growing distance between us, until 2 years ago, everything changed. Jim, my ex-husband, died in a car accident and left a will. I never imagined that the man who abandoned us would have anything to leave behind. But during the years he was away, Jim built a small fortune through investments, and for some reason I'll never understand, he left everything to Alexis. $200,000, an amount that felt like winning the lottery for us. When the lawyer gave us the news, I saw the gleam in my daughter's eyes. It wasn't joy, it was something deeper and more disturbing. It was ambition. George was by her side, and his smile sent a shiver down my spine. In that moment, I had a bad feeling, but I pushed it away. Alexis was my daughter, the girl I raised with so much love. She would never turn her back on me. How wrong I was. 3 months after receiving the inheritance, Alexis and George showed up at my house with a proposal. They wanted to build an inn on the land, taking advantage of the fact that the region was starting to attract tourists interested in agritourism. They needed me to sign some documents, temporarily transferring the property into their names to get financing at the bank. Something inside me screamed not to sign those papers. But Alexis took my hands and told me in that sweet voice that melted my heart, "Mom, trust me. We're going to build something beautiful here, and you'll be able to live out your last years in comfort without having to work so hard." George added, "Ms. Sophia, you deserve to rest. We'll take care of everything." I signed. God forgive me, but I signed. Construction began 2 months later. They tore down the old fence, remodeled the house, and built cabins where the horses used to graze freely. The transformation was fast and brutal, and along with the remodeling of the property came the change in how Alexis treated me. First, it was small things. She started correcting me in front of others, saying that I spoke poorly, that my clothes were inappropriate. Then, she started treating me like an employee in my own home. She asked me to clean, cook, and do the laundry for the inn guests. I obeyed, thinking I was helping, that it was my contribution to the family business. But things got worse. George started ignoring me completely, as if I were invisible. Alexis started complaining that I was occupying the best room in the house, that they needed that space for guests. They moved me to a tiny windowless room in the back that looked more like a storage closet. And then, 3 months ago, I discovered the truth. I was looking for one of my documents in a study drawer when I found the property papers. I read with trembling hands. The house, the land, everything was registered in Alexis's and George's names. It wasn't temporary. They had tricked me. I confronted my daughter that very night. She didn't even blink. She only said with a coldness that cut me like a knife, "Mum, you're old. You don't understand these things. We did what was best for everyone. Now you have a place to live without worries." I tried to argue, to say that this house was mine, that I had built everything with my sweat. She rolled her eyes and left the room. From that day on, the treatment got even worse. Alexis called me dead weight, a burden, a stubborn old woman. George laughed at the cruel jokes she made about my age, about my tired body, about my trembling hands. And I, like a fool, stayed there, enduring everything, because she was my daughter, and I still held out hope that she would go back to being the sweet girl I raised. Until that Tuesday morning, I woke up early as always, made coffee for the guests, and cleaned the kitchen. My back hurt more than usual, but I kept working. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, Alexis stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane. Her face was red with rage. "Mum, I warned you not to touch the guests' things," she screamed. I was confused. "But I was just cleaning the room like you asked me to." She smashed a vase. "A vase that cost $500. See? You're useless now." I tried to explain that I hadn't broken any vase, that maybe a guest had knocked it over, but she wouldn't listen. George appeared in the doorway with that malicious smile I had learned to fear. "Alexis, honey, we talked about this," he said calmly. "Your mom is getting too old to help here. She's getting in the way more than she's helping." Alexis nodded, and then she said the words that changed everything. "Mum, we've decided. Either you go to a retirement home that we'll pay for, or you go sleep with the horses in the paddock. You choose." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at my daughter, searching for any sign that this was a cruel joke, an empty threat. But her eyes were serious, determined. She was really giving me that ultimatum. That's when something inside me broke. It wasn't my heart, which had been in pieces for months. It was something different. It was the fear, the submission, the foolish hope that things could get better. All of that vanished, and in its place arose a cold, crystal-clear certainty. "All right," I said, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. "I'm leaving." Alexis looked surprised. Maybe she expected me to beg, to cry, to humiliate myself even more. But first, I continued, I need to make a phone call. I went up to my little back room, that cramped, windowless space where I had spent the last few months. My hands were trembling as I searched the bottom of the old suitcase I kept under the bed. There it was, the yellowed envelope I had kept hidden for 3 decades. Inside it, a document I swore I would only use as a last resort. And the last resort had arrived. I picked up my old cell phone, the one Alexis used to mock because it was from Grandma's time. I dialed a number that was etched into my memory, even though I had never called it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst right there. 3 rings. 4. Then a man's voice answered. Torres and Associates office, good morning. Good morning, I replied, trying to control my voice. I'd like to speak with Mr. Carlos Torres, please. It's about the Jim Ferreira case. There was a pause on the other end. 1 moment, dear. I waited, listening to the hold music. Downstairs, I could hear Alexis's and George's footsteps, their voices arguing about the next guests, living their lives as if I didn't exist, as if I were just an old piece of furniture that should be discarded. Ms. Sophia? Mr. Carlos's voice was kind, worried. Are you all right? It's been so long since I've heard from you. Mr. Torres, the time has come, I said simply. I need you to do what we talked about 30 years ago. Silence. Then, a heavy sigh. Are you completely sure? There's no going back. I'm sure. Very well. I'll prepare everything. Can you come to the office tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning? I'll be there. I hung up and sat on the bed for a long moment, holding the envelope against my chest. Inside it was the truth I had hidden from Alexis her whole life. A truth about her father, about the inheritance she received, about lies that had been built up for decades. When Jim abandoned us, he wasn't just running away from the responsibility of being a father and husband. He was running from a crime. My ex-husband had embezzled money from the company where he worked, a considerable amount. I discovered it by accident a few days before he disappeared. I found documents hidden in his study, bank statements from accounts I didn't know about. I confronted Jim that night. He panicked, said he had done it because he wanted to give us a better life, that he was going to pay the money back. But it was too late. The company had found out, and the police were investigating. He fled before he could be arrested, leaving me alone with a small child and a mountain of unanswered questions. What Alexis never knew was that the money her father invested and multiplied over the years was stolen money. Her inheritance came from a crime, and I had proof of everything. Documents Jim sent me years later, in a letter begging for forgiveness, explaining everything, imploring me not to tell Alexis. I kept that letter. I kept the documents. And I kept the secret. Not for Jim, but for my daughter. I didn't want her to grow up knowing that her father was a criminal, that the money she dreamed of receiving one day had a dirty origin. But now Alexis had used that stolen money to steal from me too, to take my house, my dignity, my life. And I was no longer going to protect her. I went down the stairs with the suitcase in my hand. It was a small suitcase, with only a few clothes and personal items. I didn't need anything else from that house. Everything that truly mattered was in the envelope I carried inside my purse. Alexis was in the living room with George. When they saw me with the suitcase, she raised an eyebrow. Have you decided then? Nursing home or paddock? Neither, I replied calmly. I'm going to stay with a friend for a few days until I sort out my situation. I saw the relief on her face. She probably thought I was accepting my fate, leaving their lives without making a scene. George gave that satisfied smile of his. Good decision, Ms. Sophia. It's for the best. I looked at my daughter. She avoided my gaze. and in that moment, I felt a pang of sorrow. She was still my little girl, somewhere behind that mask of coldness. But she was a girl I no longer recognized. "Alexis," I said softly, "are you sure this is what you want? To throw me out like this?" She finally looked me in the eye, and what I saw there gave me absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. There was no remorse, no doubt, just impatience. "Mom, stop the drama. You'll be fine, and we will too." I nodded. "All right, then that's how it is. But I want you to remember this moment, because in a few days, you're going to understand that choices have consequences." George laughed. "How dramatic, Ms. Sophia. You sound like a soap opera character." I didn't reply. I just picked up my suitcase and walked out the door. The horses neighed as I passed. I stopped for a moment and stroked the mane of Star, the oldest mare, the one Alexis loved so much as a child. The mare rested her muzzle on my hand, as if she understood I was leaving. "Take care of her," I whispered to the animal, "even if she doesn't deserve it." I walked down the dirt road until I reached the highway. I called Marcy, my friend of decades, and quickly explained the situation. Without asking questions, she said I could stay at her house for as long as I needed. That night, lying in the guest room at Marcy's house, I couldn't sleep. I thought about everything that had happened, about how I had reached this point. A part of me still doubted if I was doing the right thing. But then I remembered Alexis's gaze, that cold contempt, and my determination was renewed. The next morning arrived slowly. I dressed carefully. I put on my best clothes, a blue blouse that I had sewn myself years ago. At 9:30 in the morning, I took a bus to downtown. Mr. Carlos Torres's office was in an old but well-maintained building. The receptionist recognized me right away, even after so many years. She led me straight to his office. Mr. Carlos was older, his hair completely white now, but his gaze was still the same, penetrating and kind at the same time. He stood up and shook my hand firmly. "Ms. Sophia, I'm so sorry it's come to this." "Me too, Mr. Torres, but I don't see any other way out." He pointed to a chair and took a thick folder from the shelf. "Very well, let's go over everything from the beginning. When Jim Ferreira came to see me 32 years ago, he was desperate. He confessed to the embezzlement, handed over all the documents, and asked me to keep this as life insurance." "Life insurance?" I repeated, confused. Mr. Carlos nodded. "He was afraid the company would go after his family, so he created a document confessing everything and naming you as the sole legitimate heir to any assets he might acquire. The idea was to protect you and Alexis from future lawsuits." He opened the folder and began showing me documents. I recognized Jim's handwriting on several pages, authenticated signatures, witnesses. "But what does this mean now?" I asked. "It means, Ms. Sophia, that legally, the inheritance Alexis received should have been yours. Jim left everything in her name because he thought it would be easier, less bureaucratic. But this document right here," he tapped a specific sheet, "invalidates his will, because it was made under duress, concealing the criminal origin of the money." I felt my head spin. "So?" "So the money should have gone to you. And since your daughter used that money to fraudulently acquire your property by making you sign misleading documents, we have a legal basis to reverse everything." "Is she going to lose the inn?" I asked, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Mr. Carlos paused. "Not necessarily. It will depend on how you want to proceed. We can return the property to your name, nullifying the fraudulent transfer. As for the inheritance money, it will legally go to you. Alexis will have to return what she spent. But—" He looked at me seriously. This will completely destroy the relationship between you two. She already destroyed it, I replied, my voice sounding unlike my own. When she gave me a choice between a nursing home and a paddock, she destroyed everything that was left between us. Mr. Carlos spent the next 2 hours explaining every detail of the legal process. My head was swimming with so much information, hearings, documents, deadlines. But one thing became clearer and clearer. I had every legal right to reclaim what was mine. I wasn't asking for a favor. I was demanding justice. I signed the necessary papers to start the process. The lawyer guaranteed me that everything would be done discreetly at first. Official notifications would be sent. Alexis would have the opportunity to defend herself. But he also warned me about something that made me swallow hard. Ms. Sophia, when your daughter receives the summons, she will be furious. And she will probably try to find you, pressure you, maybe even threaten you. It's important that you are emotionally prepared for that moment. I nodded, but inside I was terrified. I knew my daughter. I knew how she could be when she was crossed. But something had changed in me after that ultimatum. I was no longer the submissive mother, willing to accept any scrap of affection. I was a woman tired of being trampled on. And that woman had teeth. I left the office feeling strange. My body was heavy with tension, but there was something lighter in my chest, as if a weight had been lifted. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my own life. Marcy was waiting for me on the corner of the building. She insisted on taking me to a coffee shop to talk. As we drank coffee, I told her everything. My friend listened in silence. Her eyes welled up when I spoke of Alexis's ultimatum. Sophia, you were too patient. Way too patient, she said, holding my hand. That girl needs to learn that a mother is not a doormat. I'm scared, Marcy. Scared I'm doing the wrong thing. She's my daughter. And you are her mother, Marcy interrupted firmly. But that doesn't mean you have to accept being treated like dirt. You gave her everything. You worked until your bones ached. And she responded with contempt. That's not love, Sophia. That's abuse. Her words echoed in my mind the whole way back. Abuse. It was a strong word, but maybe that was exactly what I was suffering. Emotional, psychological, financial abuse. And I had accepted it all in silence because I didn't want to admit that my daughter, the one I raised with so much love, was capable of treating me that way. 4 days passed. 4 days of anxiety, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. Marcy tried to distract me. She took me for walks. We watched movies together at night, but my mind was always at the inn, imagining Alexis receiving the court notification. On the 5th morning, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered with a racing heart. Mum? Alexis's voice sounded strange, too controlled. I need you to come to the house, now. Alexis, Now, she shouted, and then the call was cut off. Marcy, who was in the kitchen, looked at me worriedly. Was that her? I nodded. She got the notice. Do you want me to go with you? I thought for a moment. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to have someone by my side. But another part knew that this was between my daughter and me. It was time to face what I myself had set in motion. No, I have to go alone. But thank you, friend, for everything. The walk to the inn seemed to last an eternity, and yet flew by in the blink of an eye. My body was trembling all over when I got off the bus and started walking down the dirt road. The horses were in the paddock, grazing peacefully, oblivious to the human drama that was about to unfold. Alexis was on the porch, holding some papers in her hands. Even from a distance, I could see she was furious. Her face was red, her fists clenched. George was by her side, but for the first time, he seemed less confident, more worried. "How dare you!" Alexis screamed before I even got close. "How dare you do this to me?" I stopped a few feet away, keeping my voice calm. "Do what, Alexis? Claim what is rightfully mine?" She came down the porch steps with heavy strides, shaking the papers in the air. "This is a lie. You're lying to try and steal what my father left me." "I'm not lying. Everything in those documents is true. Your father wrote everything down, with witnesses, before he died." George came closer, trying to look threatening. "Ms. Sophia, you don't know what you're getting into. We have very good lawyers. We're going to destroy this ridiculous lawsuit." I looked at him with a calm that surprised me. "Do what you think you need to, but the truth doesn't change. The money you used was stolen, and you tricked me into taking my house. All of that is documented." "You have nothing!" Alexis yelled, tears of rage streaming down her face. "You're a bitter old woman who won't accept that I grew up, that I have my own life. You're doing this for revenge." "Revenge?" I repeated, feeling my own anger beginning to rise. "Revenge because you gave me a choice between a nursing home and a paddock. Because you treated me like dirt for months. Because you stole my house by using my love for you against me." "I didn't steal anything. You donated it. You signed the papers of your own free will. After you tricked me, made me believe it was temporary. That's called fraud, Alexis, and you know it." She lunged at me with such force that I thought she was going to hit me. George grabbed her arm. "Calm down, honey. It won't help." Alexis pulled away from him abruptly. "You want the house? You want the money? You can keep it. But don't you ever look me in the face again. Don't you ever look for me again. For me, you died today." The words were like knives, each one piercing my heart. But I didn't let her see my pain. I just responded in a firm voice. "If that's what you want, I accept. But one day, Alexis, you're going to understand what you lost. And it won't be the house or the money. It will be something that no money can buy." "What? Your self-sacrificing mother's love? I'm sick of that story." She spat the words with such hatred that she barely seemed like my daughter. "No," I replied softly. "The opportunity to have someone who loved you unconditionally, someone who would have given their life for you. You lost that today. And unlike the house and the money, there's no way to get that back." I turned around and started walking away. I could hear Alexis yelling something behind me, but I didn't catch the words. It didn't matter anymore. Every step I took moved me away from that life, from that pain, from that version of myself who accepted being treated as nothing. Marcy met me at the gate. She had been waiting, hidden behind a tree, worried that I might need help. When she saw me, she ran and hugged me tight. It was only in her arms that I allowed the tears to fall. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I cried for the daughter I had lost, for the illusion that was broken, for all those years of sacrifice that seemed to have been in vain. But I also cried with relief, because I had finally chosen my own path. I had finally said, enough is enough. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, hearings, and depositions. Mr. Carlos was tireless, presenting every document, every piece of evidence. Alexis and George hired some really good lawyers, but the truth was stronger than any fancy argument. The fraud in the property transfer was proven. I had signed believing it was temporary, and there were witnesses who confirmed it. The origin of the inheritance money was questioned, and Jim's documents spoke for themselves. During that time, I had no contact with Alexis. A part of me hoped she would show up, realize the mistake she had made, and apologize. But nothing happened. The silence between us was absolute. 3 months after the process began, the judge delivered his verdict. The property would revert to my name. The transfer had been done fraudulently. That was clear. As for the inheritance money, the situation was more complicated. The judge acknowledged that Jim's will had flaws, but since Alexis had used the money in good faith, without knowing its criminal origin, she would not be forced to return all of it. The solution was a settlement. Alexis would keep 1/2 of the original inheritance value, and the other 1/2 would be transferred to me. Additionally, she would have to pay me compensation for the unauthorized use of the property during those months. In total, I would receive around $120,000. Mr. Carlos called me to his office to explain everything. Ms. Sophia, I know it's not everything you deserved, but it's a significant victory. You get your house back and receive financial compensation that will ensure your comfort for the coming years. I nodded, still processing everything. And the inn? The cabins they built? They are part of the property, so they revert to your name as well. Alexis and George will have 30 days to vacate the premises and remove only their personal belongings. Everything that was built or attached to the property stays. The irony was not lost on me. They had used my love for Alexis to steal from me, and now all their hard work, all the investment they made, would come back to me. It was poetic justice, but it brought me no joy. Mr. Torres, I asked hesitantly, what if I wanted to make a different proposal, an out-of-court settlement? He looked at me curiously. What kind of settlement? I spent the next few days thinking. The legal victory tasted bitter. Yes, I had recovered what was mine, but I had lost my daughter in the process. And as much as she had hurt me deeply, as much as she had treated me cruelly, she was still my Alexis. The girl I used to rock in my arms, the one I comforted when she had nightmares, who smiled at me as if I were her whole world. Was there a way to seek justice without completely destroying what was left between us? It was Marcy who made me see the situation from another angle. We were having tea on her porch when she asked me, Sophia, what do you really want? Revenge or peace? It's not revenge, I protested. It's justice. I know, friend, but sometimes justice and peace are different things. You can be right and still be unhappy. You can win everything and lose what matters most. But she treated me like dirt, Marcy. She gave me a choice between a nursing home and a paddock, like I was an animal. And that was awful, she agreed. Unforgivable, even. But answer me this. Do you want your daughter to learn a lesson, or do you want her to disappear from your life forever? The question caught me off guard. I remained silent for a long time, looking at the cup of tea in my hands. What did I really want? I want her to understand, I finally replied. I want her to see how much she hurt me. I want her to feel, even just a little bit, what I felt when she kicked me out of my own home. Then maybe there's a way to do that without cutting all ties, Marcy suggested gently. That night, I formulated a plan. The next day, I called Mr. Carlos and explained what I had in mind. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, Ms. Sophia, you have a much bigger heart than I imagined. I'll prepare the documents. A week later, Alexis and George received a new notification. It wasn't an execution of the sentence, but a settlement proposal. They were asked to appear at Mr. Carlos's office for a meeting. I arrived at the office a half-hour before the appointed time. My heart was pounding. My hands were sweating. Mr. Carlos greeted me with an encouraging smile. You're doing the right thing. Trust yourself. When Alexis and George entered the room, the atmosphere froze. My daughter avoided looking at me, sitting as far away as possible. George looked nervous, constantly playing with his hands. Their lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with an arrogant air, maintained a neutral expression. Mr. Carlos started the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here because my client would like to propose a different settlement than the one determined by the court judgment. Alexis's lawyer raised an eyebrow. What kind of settlement? Ms. Sophia is willing not to execute the sentence completely, under certain conditions, Mr. Carlos explained, looking at me for confirmation. I nodded, and he continued. First condition. The property reverts to Ms. Sophia's name, as determined by the judge. This is non-negotiable. Alexis finally looked at me, her eyes full of contained rage, but she didn't say anything. Second condition. Instead of completely vacating the property, Alexis and George can continue to manage the inn, but now as tenants, paying a fair monthly rent to Ms. Sophia. There was a moment of stunned silence. Their lawyer leaned forward. And what would the amount of that rent be? Mr. Carlos slid a piece of paper across the table. $3,000 a month, with annual adjustment. It is below market value, considering the size of the property and the commercial potential. George took the paper, analyzing the numbers. For the first time, I saw something like hope on his face, but Alexis remained rigid, her arms crossed. Third condition, Mr. Carlos continued. Ms. Sophia waives the compensation owed to her, but in exchange she will have the right to live on the property whenever she wants, in a room that will be designated exclusively for her. Alexis and George cannot prevent this or question her presence. That's ridiculous, Alexis finally spoke, her voice harsh. She wants to humiliate us, force us to see her every day. I felt a pang of sadness at her words, but I maintained my composure. Mr. Carlos looked at me, silently asking permission to continue. I nodded. Fourth and final condition, he said, his voice becoming more serious. Alexis and George will participate in family therapy sessions with Ms. Sophia once a week for 6 months. It is non-negotiable. Therapy? George practically spat out the word. This is absurd. For the first time since they walked in, I spoke. It's this or the full execution of the sentence. You lose everything. The inn, the business you built, the opportunity to salvage something from this situation. Alexis faced me, and for the first time, I saw something more than rage in her eyes. There was fear there, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of regret. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice slightly breaking. If it's to torture me, to rub it in my face that you won. It's not about winning or losing, I interrupted her, my own voice choked with emotion. It's about trying to save what can still be saved. It's about giving you the chance to understand what you did. And it's about me having the courage to look at myself in the mirror and know that I did everything I could. Their lawyer asked for a moment to speak privately with his clients. The 3 of them left the room. Mr. Carlos held my hand. Regardless of what they decide, you are being very brave. 15 minutes later, they returned. Alexis's eyes were red as if she had been crying. George looked defeated. The lawyer went straight to the point. My clients accept the terms of the settlement. We signed the papers that same afternoon. Each signature felt like it weighed a ton. When we finished, Alexis quickly left the room without looking back. George followed her, but stopped at the door and turned back to me. Ms. Sophia, he said in a low voice. I'm sorry for the things I said, for the way I treated you. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something. George, I replied, I hope you use this opportunity well, because there won't be another one. He nodded and left. I returned to the property on a Thursday afternoon. Marcy insisted on coming with me, and I gratefully accepted. I needed moral support for that moment. The house looked different, and yet exactly the same. The cabins Alexis built were pretty, I had to admit. She had good taste, she got that from me. But it wasn't the cabins I looked at first. My eyes went straight to the paddock, where the horses were grazing peacefully. Star, the old mare, raised her head when she saw me and trotted up to the fence. I stroked her muzzle, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "I'm home," I whispered to her. "I'm back." Marcy gently touched my shoulder. "Do you want me to stay with you tonight?" "No, friend. I need to do this alone. I need to reclaim this space, you know?" She understood. She hugged me tight and left, but not before making me promise to call if I needed anything. I walked into the house slowly, as if I were stepping onto unfamiliar territory. Everything was clean, organized. Alexis and George had left my room, the real one, not that storage closet, intact. My things were still there, just as I had left them months ago. I sat on the bed and looked around. This room held so many memories. It was where I spent sleepless nights when Alexis was a baby, rocking her to sleep. It was where I cried when Jim abandoned us. It was where I dreamed of a better future for my daughter. And it was from here that I was expelled, treated like a nuisance. But now I was back. The house was mine again. Legally, judicially, mine. But emotionally, it still felt like enemy territory. I spent the rest of the day organizing my things, cleaning, trying to make that space feel like mine again. Alexis and George didn't appear. They were probably in one of the cabins, avoiding me. It was better that way for now. We needed time to process everything. The first therapy session was scheduled for the following Monday. The chosen therapist, Dr. Laura Scott, was a specialist in family conflict. Mr. Carlos had personally recommended her, saying she was firm yet compassionate, exactly what we needed. On Sunday night, I barely slept. I imagined what that first session would be like. What would I say? What would Alexis say? Would she really go, or would she try to make an excuse? On Monday morning, I got ready carefully. I chose a light green blouse that Alexis always said looked good on me. It was a pathetic way to try and connect with her, I knew, but I couldn't help it. Dr. Laura's office was in an old house converted into a clinic downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early. Alexis and George arrived exactly on time, not a minute more or less. We greeted each other with a nod, no words. The tension was palpable. The receptionist guided us to a spacious, cozy room with comfortable sofas and decor that tried to be relaxing. Dr. Laura was a woman in her 50s, grey hair pulled back in a bun, attentive eyes behind red-rimmed glasses. She greeted us warmly and asked us to sit down. I chose an armchair. Alexis and George sat together on the farthest sofa. The geography of the room already said everything about the state of our relationship. "Well, Doctor," Laura began in a soft but firm voice. "I appreciate everyone's presence. I know being here wasn't an easy choice, especially under the current circumstances, but the fact that you agreed to come is already an important first step." Alexis scoffed softly. The therapist heard it, but didn't comment. She just continued. "Our sessions will follow some basic rules. First, each person will have their turn to speak, without interruptions. Second, there are no judgments here, just listening and attempting to understand. Third, everything that is said in this room stays in this room, unless it's something that poses an immediate risk to someone." She paused, observing us. "To start, I would like each of you to tell me, in a few words, what you hope to gain from these sessions. Sophia, would you like to begin?" I took a deep breath. I hope we can find some way to coexist. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. That's impossible. But I hope we can at least respect each other. And maybe, who knows, Alexis can understand how much she hurt me. The therapist nodded and turned to my daughter. Alexis? She remained silent for a long moment. Then, in a harsh voice, I'm only here because I was forced. I don't expect anything because I don't believe these sessions are going to change anything. My mum has always been dramatic, always played the victim. This is just one more chapter in that story. Her words were like slaps in the face. Dr. Laura wrote something in her notebook, but maintained a neutral expression. George? She asked. He seemed uncomfortable. Look, I just want to resolve this, so we can move on with our lives. The inn is starting to do well. We have guests booking, but all this tension is ruining everything. I understand, said Dr. Laura. So, here we have 3 different perspectives. Sophia seeks understanding and respect. Alexis is skeptical and feels coerced. George wants to resolve the practical situation. All are valid perspectives. She leaned forward. But before we talk about the future, we need to understand the past. Sophia, can you tell me, briefly, how we got here? And then I started talking. I recounted Jim's abandonment, the years of raising Alexis alone, the sacrifices. I talked about her marriage to George, about how I was gradually pushed into a corner. I talked about the fraudulent property transfer, about how I was tricked. And I talked about that day, the day of the ultimatum. She told me, my voice trembled, that I had to choose between the nursing home or sleeping with the horses in the paddock, as if I were an animal, as if 62 years of life, of love, of dedication, meant nothing. Alexis exploded. You're twisting everything. I never— Alexis, Dr. Laura interrupted firmly. Do you remember the rule? Everyone speaks in their own time. You will have your opportunity. My daughter crossed her arms, furious, but she fell silent. I continued, now with tears streaming down my face. In that moment, when she gave me that choice, something died inside me. It wasn't my love for her. That never died. It was my self-respect, my dignity, which I had slowly let die over all those months of humiliation. And I realized I needed to choose, not between a nursing home and a paddock, but between continuing to be trampled on or standing up and fighting for the minimum respect I deserved. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Dr. Laura handed me a box of tissues. I wiped my tears, trying to regain my composure. Alexis, the therapist said gently, it's your turn. Tell your version. My daughter took a deep breath. When she started talking, her voice was charged with anger, but there was something else there. There was pain, too. My mum has always been like this, always playing the martyr. Oh, I worked so hard for you. Oh, I sacrificed so much, as if I asked for it, as if it were my fault she stayed with a man who ran away. Every word was a stab, but I forced myself to listen without interrupting. She never let me grow up, Alexis continued, always suffocating me with that possessive love. When I met George, she didn't like him from the start. I saw it in her eyes, that silent judgment. And when we decided to live together, she made all that drama. I never made drama. I couldn't contain myself. Yes, you did, Alexis yelled. Not with words, but with those looks, those sighs, always making me feel guilty for wanting to have my own life. Dr. Laura raised her hand. Sophia, you will have a chance to respond. Alexis, continue. My daughter wiped a tear that insisted on falling. When we received my father's inheritance, it was the first time in my life I had any money, any chance to do something for myself, to build something. And of course, my mum was there, with that disapproving look, thinking I was going to waste it all. I never said that, I started. You didn't have to, Alexis exploded. It was written all over your face. And when we had the idea for the inn, she didn't even like it. She kept up her attitude of, I'm supporting this, but I actually think it's a terrible idea. George put his hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her. She took a deep breath before continuing. We didn't trick you with the house papers. We explained everything. You were the one who didn't understand because you never cared about these practical things. That's not true, I protested, but Dr. Laura shot me a warning look. And yes, Alexis continued, her voice growing quieter. I said that thing about the nursing home and the paddock, but it was in the heat of the moment. I was stressed. You were always complaining about everything, getting in the guests' way. Getting in the way? I couldn't help myself. I was working like a slave in my own house. Your house? Alexis stood up from the sofa. That's the point. You never accepted that the house was ours too, that we had the right to make changes, to run our business without you controlling everything. Enough! Dr. Laura's voice boomed in the room. We both fell silent immediately. The therapist looked at us sternly. I know there's a lot of suppressed emotion here, but we're going to do the following. Each of you is going to take 5 deep breaths. Now. We obeyed, albeit reluctantly. The air went in and out of my lungs, but my heart was still racing. Better, said Dr. Laura. Now we're going to try something different. Sophia, I want you to repeat back to Alexis what you just heard. Not what you believe, not your interpretation, just what she said. I looked at my daughter, then at the therapist. She said she always felt suffocated by me, that I made her feel guilty for wanting to have her own life. Continue, Doctor, Laura encouraged. She said that I disapproved of George from the beginning, and that when they wanted to build the inn, I didn't truly support her. I paused, swallowing, and that she doesn't believe she tricked me with the house papers. Alexis looked at me, surprised. Maybe she expected me to twist her words, but I had genuinely listened. Alexis, the therapist turned to her. Now you, repeat what your mother said. My daughter hesitated, then mumbled. She said she raised me alone, that she made sacrifices, and that on the day of the ultimatum it hurt her very much. Continue, Dr. Laura insisted. She said something died inside her when I said that. Alexis's voice was softer now, and that she had to choose between continuing to be trampled on or fighting for respect. There was a moment of silence. Then the therapist said something that would change the course of everything. You are both right, and you are both wrong. Doctor. Laura's words hung in the air like a revelation neither of us expected. I looked at her, confused, and from the reflection I saw, Alexis had the same expression. How are we right and wrong? I asked. The therapist leaned back in her chair, clasping her hands. Because the truth is rarely absolute in family conflicts. Sophia, you are right that you were treated with disrespect, that your daughter crossed unacceptable boundaries. What she said about the nursing home and the paddock was cruel, and no context justifies that level of dehumanization. I felt a validation I hadn't expected, and new tears threatened to fall. But, Dr. Laura continued, turning to me, you also need to recognize that you may have been suffocating at times, that your love, however genuine, may have become an emotional prison for Alexis. I never meant to. I know you didn't, she interrupted gently. No loving mother means to. but intention and outcome are not always the same. Then she turned to Alexis. And you, young lady, are right that you had the right to grow up, to have your own life, to make your own decisions, but you are completely wrong in how you handled it. Instead of setting healthy boundaries, of talking openly with your mother about your needs, you allowed resentment to fester until it turned into cruelty. Alexis lowered her gaze. And worse, Dr. Laura continued, her voice becoming firmer. You used the love your mother had for you as a weapon against her. You knew she would sign those papers because she trusted you. You may not have consciously planned to trick her, but deep down, you knew you were taking advantage of the situation. I didn't, Alexis tried to protest, but her voice failed. And when she started questioning you, when she got in your way, you didn't have the courage to confront her honestly. Instead, you humiliated her in a way you knew would destroy her. The silence that followed was heavy with truths unspoken for so long. George shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, probably regretting agreeing to this therapy. The problem with the two of you, Dr. Laura concluded, is that you never learned to be adult mother and daughter. Sophia, you remained stuck in the role of the protective mother of a child who grew up a long time ago. And Alexis, you remained stuck in the role of the resentful daughter who never had the courage to simply say, Mum, I love you, but I need space. I looked at my hands, those hands that had worked so hard, that had held Alexis as a baby, that had sewn her clothes, that had been injured to give her a better life. And I wondered, was Dr. Laura right? Had I been suffocating? I want to suggest an exercise, the therapist said, picking up 2 sheets of paper and 2 pens. Each of you is going to write a letter to the other. But it's not a normal letter. It's a letter from the other person's point of view. How? Alexis asked. Sophia, you are going to write to Alexis, telling her what it was like to grow up with you as a mother. And Alexis, you are going to write as if you were Sophia, telling what it was like to raise a daughter alone, and then be treated that way. This is ridiculous, Alexis muttered. It's uncomfortable, Dr. Laura corrected, which is different from ridiculous. And you have 15 minutes. You may begin. I took the pen with trembling fingers. Write from Alexis's point of view. How could I do that? But I started, letting the words flow without thinking too much. I grew up knowing my mother loved me, but that love always came with a weight. She sacrificed so much that I felt like I owed her my entire life. Every choice I made felt like a betrayal when it wasn't the one she wanted for me. I love her, but sometimes I just wanted to be free to make mistakes without feeling like I was hurting her. I stopped, feeling the tears return. It was too painful to see things from her perspective, to imagine that my love could have been a burden. When the 15 minutes were up, Dr. Laura asked us to read aloud. I read first, my voice breaking in several places. When I finished, I looked at Alexis. She was crying silently. Your turn, the therapist said gently to my daughter. Alexis wiped her tears and began to read with a choked voice. I worked until my bones ached to give her everything I never had. I watched her grow up and thought it was all worth it. I never expected gratitude, just love. But when she kicked me out of the house, I built. I felt like everything I did meant nothing. I felt like I meant nothing. She stopped, unable to continue. Tears were falling freely now, soaking the paper. George put his arm around her, trying to comfort her. Do you see? Dr. Laura asked softly. You both managed to understand, even if only for a moment, the other's point of view. That is empathy, and empathy is the first step toward healing. The session ended shortly after. We left the office emotionally drained. Alexis and George went one way, I went another. But before we completely separated, my daughter turned around. Mom, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. I I need to think about all of this. Me too, I replied. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a reconciliation, but it was something. It was a door that had been opened, even if only a crack. The following days brought subtle but significant changes. I returned to the routine of living on the property. Alexis and George managed the inn. I took care of my own business. We crossed paths occasionally, exchanging polite but cold words. The guests probably noticed the tension, but no one commented. I spent hours in the paddock with the horses. They didn't judge, they didn't hold grudges. They just accepted my presence with that simplicity that only animals have. Star became my constant companion. I told her things I couldn't tell anyone, and she just nodded her head, as if she understood everything. One afternoon, I was brushing Star's mane when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Alexis standing a few feet away, hesitant. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. She approached slowly, as if I were a wild animal that might bolt. We stood side by side, both looking at Star. "I remember when we got her," Alexis said softly. "I was 6 years old. Dad brought her home in an old trailer. She was just a scared, trembling colt, afraid of everything." "I remember," I replied. "You insisted on sleeping in the barn that first night because you didn't want her to be alone." A sad smile crossed Alexis's face. "You brought blankets and stayed with me all night, telling me stories, singing softly. You didn't sleep a wink. It was worth it. You were happy." We were silent for a moment. Then Alexis said, her voice low, "I remember a lot of good things, Mum. It's not that I forgot them. It's just the bad things got bigger, you know? Like they took up all the space in my head." I continued brushing Star's mane, giving her time to find the words. "The therapist gave me an exercise," she continued. "She asked me to make a list of all the good things you did for me, and another list of the bad things." She paused. The list of good things was 3 pages long. The list of bad thing, half a page. I felt my heart clench. And still half a page was enough to make you hate me. "I don't hate you," she said quickly, looking at me for the first time. "I never hated you. I was confused, angry, scared." "Scared of what?" Alexis took a deep breath. "Of becoming you. Of spending my whole life sacrificing myself, suffocating myself, never being anything more than a mother. When I looked at you, I saw a future that terrified me. And instead of talking about it, instead of processing those feelings, I just pushed you away." "But I never asked you to be like me," I protested. "I wanted you to be happy, to have opportunities I never had." "I know that now," she said, wiping away a tear. "But at the time, all I felt was pressure. The pressure to be grateful, to be the perfect daughter, to make up for all your sacrifices. And I knew I would never succeed. So I started to resent you for doing so much for me." The brutal honesty of those words left me breathless. But that was exactly what we needed, wasn't it? Even if it hurt. "And George," she continued, "he saw my frustration and fed it. He said you were controlling, that I needed to be free. And I wanted to believe it, because it was easier than admitting my own guilt." "Did you love him?" I asked, not knowing why that question mattered. "I do love him," she corrected. "I still love him, but now I see that our relationship was built, in part, on that rebellion against you, and that's not healthy." Star nudged my hand with her muzzle, as if asking me to keep stroking her. I obeyed, and the repetitive movement helped me organize my thoughts. "Alexis," I began carefully, I accept that I may have been suffocating, that my love, at times, imprisoned you instead of setting you free. But that doesn't justify what you did, the words you said, the way you treated me. I know, she whispered. I know, and I have no excuse. That day, when I said that thing about the nursing home and the paddock, I saw the light go out in your eyes, and I felt a terrible pleasure because I finally had power over you. But a second later, I felt a horror so great because I realized that I had become exactly the kind of person I always despised. I sobbed, covering my face with my hands. I became my father. I abandoned you the same way he abandoned me. And the worst part is that I knew I was doing it while I was doing it. And I did it anyway. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort her, tell her everything was fine. But it wasn't all fine. And pretending it was would be going back to the old patterns. What do you want from me now? I finally asked. Alexis lowered her hands, revealing a face ravaged by guilt. I don't know if I have the right to want anything, but I would like the chance to get to know you for real, not as the mother who raised me, not as the woman I pushed away, but as Sophia, the woman you are, with your own dreams, with a life that doesn't revolve just around me. The answer surprised me. I hadn't expected that. I don't even know who that Sophia is, I admitted. I spent so long being a mother that I forgot how to be a person. Then maybe we can discover it together, she said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. No pressure, no expectations, just trying. I looked at my daughter. She seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. I saw in her the 6-year-old girl who slept in the barn, and also the 30-year-old woman who gave me the cruelest ultimatum. Both were Alexis. Both were part of her. All right, I said slowly. We can try, but with conditions. She nodded quickly. Anything. First, total honesty. If something bothers you, you say it, without silent resentments building up until they explode. Agreed. Second, clear boundaries. You have your life. I have mine. We can love each other without living inside each other. Yes, she nodded, wiping her tears. And third, I paused, because this was the hardest one. You need to do individual therapy, not just the family sessions. You have things to resolve that have nothing to do with me, and you need to do it for yourself. Alexis was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. I already started. After that first session, I looked for Dr. Laura and asked for private sessions. I go twice a week. I felt a surge of unexpected pride. My daughter was truly trying to change. And you, Mum? She asked timidly. Are you going to do therapy alone too? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about it. You should, Alexis said gently. You have things to resolve too. The way Dad left you, the years of struggle, everything you went through with me. You deserve that space to heal. She was right. Once again, my daughter was showing me something I didn't want to see. I'll think about it, I promised. We stood there for a little longer, in silence, watching the horses. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't that suffocating tension from before either. It was just two women trying to find a way. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes. I started my own sessions with Dr. Laura, and it was like opening a box that had been closed for decades. We talked about Jim, about how his abandonment shaped the way I loved Alexis. We talked about my need to be needed, to prove my worth through sacrifice. Sophia, the therapist told me in one session, you transformed your suffering into identity. You became the woman who suffers, who sacrifices, who endures everything, and subconsciously, you started to need that role. Because if you weren't suffering, who would you be? The question haunted me for days. Who was I apart from mother, apart from victim, apart from the strong woman who endured everything? I decided to find out. I started with something small. I enrolled in a painting class in town. I had always liked to draw when I was young, but I gave it up when Alexis was born. There was no time, no money, no space for my little dreams. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I would take the bus and go to class. The other students were younger, but they welcomed me well. I discovered that I had some talent, or at least enthusiasm. I painted the paddock, the horses, the sunset over the property. One afternoon, I was painting on the porch when Alexis arrived from the market. She stopped, observing my canvas. "It's beautiful," she said, and she seemed sincere. "Thank you. I'm taking a class." "Really? I didn't know you painted." "I didn't know either," I replied with a half smile. Or rather, I had forgotten. She pulled up a chair and sat next to me, watching me work. It was the first time we were together like that, with no palpable tension in the air, with no heavy words that needed to be said. "Mum," she spoke after a while, "you're different." "Different how?" "Lighter, as if, I don't know, as if you were less concerned with being my mother and more concerned with being yourself." Dr. Laura helped me see that I got lost in the role of mother, that I forgot to be Sophia. Alexis nodded thoughtfully. "In my individual therapy, I've been working on something similar. How did I define myself so much against you that I forgot to define myself for myself?" "And are you finding out who you are?" "Little by little," she replied. "It's harder than it seems, peeling back all the layers of anger, of resentment, of expectations, and finding who I really am underneath all of that." We kept talking, and for the first time in years, we didn't talk about the past or our wounds. We talked about small things: the new guest who had arrived with 3 dogs, the changing weather, a recipe Alexis wanted to try. They were normal conversations of normal people, of a mother and daughter who were learning to simply exist together. The family therapy sessions continued. Some were productive, others were emotional battlegrounds. In one of them, a particularly difficult one, Dr. Laura had us do a forgiveness exercise. "Forgiveness," she explained. "It's not forgetting or justifying. It's letting go of the weight you carry. It's a gift you give yourselves, not to the person who hurt you." She gave us papers and asked us to write, "I forgive you for," and list everything. I wrote, "Alexis, I forgive you for kicking me out. I forgive you for giving me that cruel ultimatum. I forgive you for using my love against me. I forgive you for making me feel worthless. But mainly, I forgive you for being human, for making mistakes, for being imperfect, just as I need to forgive myself for the same things." When I read it aloud, Alexis cried. Then she read hers. "Mum, I forgive you for suffocating me, even if you didn't mean to. I forgive you for making me feel guilty, even though it wasn't your intention. I forgive you for not seeing me as an adult. But mainly, I forgive you for being human, for doing the best you could with the tools you had. And I forgive myself for being so hard on you, when you were only trying to love me in the only way you knew how." There were no hugs that day. There was no big cinematic reconciliation moment, just a silent understanding, a weight being slowly lifted from our shoulders. The months passed. The inn prospered under Alexis's and George's management. They were good at it, I had to admit. Organized, attentive to the guests, creative in their marketing strategies. They paid the rent on time, kept everything clean and running. And me? I was discovering Sophia. I started sewing again, not out of necessity, but for pleasure. I made embroidered pillows that I sold at a craft fair in town. It wasn't much money, but it was mine, earned with something I loved to do. I made friends in the painting class. Women my age who were also rediscovering who they were after years of being defined only by their roles as mothers and wives. We would go out for coffee, go to the movies, complain about our backaches, and share recipes. I had a life, my own life. One afternoon, 6 months after that first therapy session, Alexis came to me with a proposal. Mum, George and I have been talking. The inn is doing well, but we're thinking of expanding, adding a few more cabins, maybe a small event area. I felt my stomach clench. Alexis, I'm not going to sign anything else without… No, she interrupted me quickly. It's not that. We want to propose a real partnership. Official, with contracts, lawyers, everything in order. You would be a partner with 40%, us with 60%. You would invest part of the money you received, and in exchange, you would have a share in the profits and a vote in the big decisions. I looked at her, surprised. Why would you do that? Because it's fair, she replied simply. It's your property. And why else? Because we want to do it right this time. No tricks, no lies, no taking advantage of you. George appeared behind her, looking nervous, but determined. Ms. Sophia, I never formally apologized for my role in all of this. I was arrogant, manipulative, and I treated you with disrespect. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. I remained silent, processing. This version of George was different from the man I knew. Therapy was changing him too. I need to think about it, I replied, and talk to Mr. Carlos, but I appreciate the honesty. I spoke with my lawyer. He reviewed the proposal and said it was fair, even generous, considering I wasn't putting active work into the inn. We analysed every clause, every detail. A week later, we signed the contract. This time, knowing exactly what I was signing. This time, as equals. Dr. Laura celebrated the milestone in our next session. This is huge. You built enough trust to go into business together. It's a giant step. But she was right to be cautious. Remember, she warned, rebuilding trust is like building a house, brick by brick, patiently, and one false move can tear it all down again. We kept the sessions, even when they seemed unnecessary, because we had learned that problems don't scream before they explode. They whisper for years until no one can hear them anymore. In one session, 9 months after the therapy began, Dr. Laura gave us a final exercise. I want you to write gratitude letters, not letters of forgiveness or apology, but letters thanking the other person for what they brought you, even if it was through pain. I spent an entire week writing and rewriting. On the day of the session, I read with a trembling voice. Alexis, I thank you for forcing me to see who I had become. Thank you for breaking me in a way that made me have to rebuild myself better. Thank you for showing me that love without limits is not love. It's a prison. Thank you for growing up and becoming a woman strong enough to stand up to me, even if it was in the wrong way. And thank you for coming back, for trying, for not giving up on us, even when it would have been easier. Alexis also read hers, crying. Mum, I thank you for every sacrifice you made, even the ones I resented. Thank you for loving me with such intensity that it hurt. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. Thank you for teaching me, through your example of fighting back, that it is possible to be strong without being cruel. And I apologize to myself for having been so hard on you when you were only trying to love me in the only way you knew how. A year had passed since that terrible ultimatum. A year since my daughter gave me a choice between a nursing home and a paddock. A year since I decided I would accept neither of the two options and would create my own choice. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were hosting a party at the inn. Nothing big, just a barbecue to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the new partnership, as we joked. We had invited the regular guests, some friends, Marcy and Mr. Carlos. I was in the kitchen preparing salads when Alexis came in carrying a box. "Mum, I found this in the attic. I think you'll want to see it." Inside the box were old photos. Alexis as a baby in my arms. Alexis as a little girl riding Star for the first time. Alexis as a teenager at the prom wearing the dress I had sewn. A lifetime in yellowed photographs. "I remember this day," she said, picking up a specific photo. It was her 10th birthday. We were both covered in flour because we tried to bake a cake and it exploded in the kitchen. Laughing, completely happy. "I remember too," I replied, feeling the tears come. "You said it was the best birthday of your life." "It was," she confirmed softly. "And it wasn't because of the cake or the gifts. It was because you were there, truly present, laughing with me. Not the sacrificing, tired mum. Just you, being happy." I looked at her. "Do you know what, Dr. Bear? Laura made me realize that I got so used to suffering that I forgot how to be happy, as if joy was a betrayal of my sacrifices." "And now?" Alexis asked. "Are you happy?" I pondered the question. Was I? My life was so different now. I had my house back, but divided. I had my daughter back, but transformed. I had money, security, my own projects. But was I happy? "I am at peace," I finally replied. "Which is perhaps better than happiness. Happiness comes and goes. Peace stays." "Peace," she repeated, savouring the word. "Yes, I think I'm at peace too, finally." George called from the outside area, announcing that the barbecue was almost ready. Alexis took the salads and left. I stayed alone in the kitchen for a moment, looking out the window. I saw my daughter outside, laughing with the guests. I saw the horses in the paddock, grazing peacefully. I saw my property, my house, my life, rebuilt in a way I never imagined, but somehow more real, more honest than before. Marcy came into the kitchen and hugged me from behind. "How are you, friend?" "Good," I replied. And it was true. Better than I've been in a long time. "You know I'm proud of you, right? Of what you did, of how you stood firm but still left room for forgiveness." "It wasn't immediate forgiveness," I corrected. "It was a process. It's still a process." "The best ones are," she said wisely. The party was good, simple, but full of human warmth. Mr. Carlos made a toast, talking about justice and compassion and walking hand in hand. People ate, drank, and laughed. It was normal, every day, perfect in its imperfection. Later, when the guests started to leave, Alexis came up to me. "Mum, there's something I want to show you. Can you come with me?" We walked to the paddock. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. Star approached us, and Alexis stroked her affectionately. "Remember when you said I would choose between the nursing home and the paddock?" she asked, her voice low. My body tensed. It still hurt to talk about that day. "I remember." I was thinking about choices, about how sometimes we give people impossible choices, trying to corner them. But the best people, the strongest ones, refuse to choose between the bad options. They create their own choice. "That's what I tried to do," I admitted. "And it worked," she said, looking at me. You didn't go to the nursing home, and you didn't sleep with the horses. You kept the house, you recovered your dignity, and you still didn't completely destroy me in the process. You created a third option, justice with mercy. It wasn't easy, I confessed. There were days when I only wanted pure revenge, days when I wanted to make you suffer as much as I suffered. I know, she said softly, and I would have deserved it. But you chose differently. And that saved me, Mum. It saved me from becoming irredeemably the horrible person I was turning into. We stood in silence, watching the last rays of sun disappear over the horizon. George and I are trying to have a baby, Alexis said suddenly. My heart skipped a beat. Really? Yes. And I'm terrified, she confessed. Terrified of being a bad mother, of repeating the mistakes, of loving too much or too little, of suffocating or neglecting, of being human, I completed. She let out a choked laugh. Yes, that. Alexis. I held her hands. You're going to make mistakes. Every parent makes mistakes. I made so many with you. But the difference is that now you have awareness of that. You have tools, you have therapy, you have self-knowledge, and you have this, I squeezed her hands, a reminder of what not to do. I want you to be a present grandmother, she said. Not a grandmother who does everything, not a grandmother who takes over the role of mother, but a grandmother who is there, who loves, who supports, with healthy boundaries on both sides. I would really like that, I replied, emotional. And I promise, she continued, that I will never, ever let my child disrespect you, treat you the way I treated you, because one of the things I will teach them is gratitude, respect, and that love is not a prison. We hugged there, in the paddock, while Star grazed peacefully beside us. It wasn't a happily ever after ending. It was real, complicated, full of scars that would never completely disappear. But it was ours, and it was good. That night, before sleeping, I opened my journal. I started writing during therapy, an exercise Dr. Laura suggested. I wrote, "Today is exactly 1 year since Alexis gave me that ultimatum. A year since my life completely changed. If someone had told me that day that we would be here now, working together, healing together, I wouldn't have believed it. I learned that a mother's love doesn't have to mean endless sacrifice, that saying no, setting boundaries, demanding respect, doesn't make me a bad mother. It makes me human. I learned that forgiving is not forgetting. It's carrying the memory of the pain, but choosing not to let it define who you are. I learned that it's never too late to start over. At 62 years old, I am discovering who I am apart from being a mother, and that discovery is terrifying and beautiful at the same time. And I learned that sometimes, to save a relationship, you first need to destroy the sick version of it, to then rebuild something new, stronger, more honest. I still have difficult days, days when the resentment returns, days when I look at Alexis and remember the cruelty in her eyes when she gave me a choice between a nursing home and a paddock. But I have more good days now. Days when I see my daughter and recognize the incredible woman she is becoming. Not despite the mistakes, but because of them. Life didn't give us a happy ending. It gave us something better, a new opportunity. And this time, we are determined to do it right. I closed the journal and turned off the light. Through the window, I could see the paddock under the moonlight. The horses were sleeping standing up. How do they do that? Star, old and wise, looked at me for a moment before closing her eyes again. I smiled in the darkness. When Alexis gave me that cruel choice, she thought she was putting me in my place. But what she didn't know was that I would create my own choice, a choice that would save me, that would save her, that would give us both something we thought we had lost forever, a chance to start over. I didn't choose the nursing home, where I would slowly die in abandonment. I didn't choose the paddock, where I would be humiliated and dehumanized. I chose dignity. I chose justice. I chose the truth. And in doing that, I chose life. My own life, finally. Now, if you liked this story, click to subscribe. And tell me in the comments what part left your jaw dropped. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos that I don't upload here. I'll see you there.